She was one of the most powerful women in America, and in 30 seconds flat, the ocean made her look like nobody. The wave came without warning. It took the cabana, the documents, and every carefully constructed wall she'd built around herself, and threw them across a crowded Malibu beach in front of 100 smartphones and twice as many strangers who couldn't believe their luck. Everyone watched. Everyone recorded. One man put his phone away and walked toward her instead. He didn't know her name. He didn't care about her money. He just saw someone who needed help. That choice, that one quiet, unremarkable choice, would destroy both their lives before it saved them. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning Logan Pierce packed the beach bag, he argued with himself about whether or not to even go. That was how most of his days started now, not with alarm clocks or coffee or any of the normal rituals people use to mark the beginning of something. They started with a quiet negotiation inside his own head, a slow back and forth between the version of himself that understood Sophie needed a father who showed up, and the version that was just tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. "Daddy." Sophie's voice came from the hallway before he'd even finished filling the water bottles. "You said we were leaving at 9. It's 8:53. That's almost 9. That is not almost 9. That is 9 minus 7 minutes. She appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing her swimsuit, her beach towel already draped around her neck like a cape, her dark hair pulled into a lopsided ponytail. She'd done herself because she'd decided 2 months ago that she was old enough to handle it. The ponytail disagreed with that assessment. It listed dramatically to the left and had a strange lump near the base that Logan had never been able to identify. He'd offered to fix it exactly once. She'd given him a look that reminded him uncomfortably of her mother. He didn't offer again. "Fine," he said. "Go get your sandals." "They're already on." They were. She was standing there in her swimsuit and her lopsided ponytail and her sandals, water bottle in hand, ready to go, staring at him with the particular patience of an 8-year-old who has learned that adults take longer to get ready than they claim. Logan zipped the bag, grabbed his keys off the counter, and followed his daughter out the door. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Santa Monica on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like someone's cooking on every floor except theirs, and had an elevator that worked about 60% of the time. The remaining 40%, Logan and Sophie took the stairs, which Sophie had decided was an adventure, and Logan had decided was cardio he hadn't asked for. The elevator worked today. Sophie pressed the button for the lobby 3 times, the way she always did, as if pressing it multiple times would make it arrive faster. Logan had explained once that it didn't work that way. She'd looked at him and pressed it a 4th time. He'd stopped explaining. The drive to Malibu took 40 minutes in light traffic, which on a Saturday in July was an optimistic way of saying it took an hour and 15. Sophie spent most of it with her face tipped toward the window, watching the city slide past, occasionally offering observations about things she saw. "That dog is wearing a sweater. It's like 80 degrees. The dog didn't pick the sweater. That's sad." "Probably." She was quiet for a while after that, which Logan had learned meant she was thinking about something. Sophie's silences weren't empty, they had texture. This one lasted about 4 minutes, which put it in the medium weight category. "Are you going to swim today?" she asked eventually. "Probably just wade." "You always say wade, and then you don't go in at all." "I go into my knees." "Your knees aren't swimming, Dad." "My knees are participating." She turned from the window to look at him directly, which in the passenger seat of a moving car required a full pivot. "Uncle Derek says you used to surf." "Uncle Derek says a lot of things." "Did you?" Logan kept his eyes on the highway. The Pacific glittered ahead of them, visible now between the hills, going on forever in a way that still got him sometimes even after 8 years of living close enough to see it. "Yeah," he said. "I used to surf." "Why'd you stop?" He thought about several answers, settled on the honest one. "Things changed." Sophie seemed to weigh this. Turned back to the window. "Maybe you could start again." "Maybe." She didn't push it, which was one of the things about her that broke his heart a little. She'd learned not to push. Kids weren't supposed to learn that. They were supposed to push endlessly, relentlessly, the way water carved canyons, through sheer persistence and the refusal to accept that something was closed. Sophie had stopped pushing sometime around her 6th birthday, about a year after they'd lost Claire. Logan didn't know if that was the cause or just the timing. He suspected it was both. He merged onto the Pacific Coast Highway and didn't say anything else until they found parking. Malibu in July was exactly what you'd expect, and exactly what Logan had been hoping Sophie would love. The beach was already crowded by the time they arrived. It was barely 10:30, with the full chaotic spectrum of a Southern California summer Saturday. Families had staked out territory with umbrellas and coolers. A group of college kids had arranged themselves in a rough circle around a portable speaker. A man in a hat that was too serious for the beach was attempting to fly a kite that was not cooperating. 2 lifeguards in the tower were watching the water with the professional calm of people who had seen everything. Sophie stopped at the edge of the sand and surveyed all of it with the focused intensity of a general assessing terrain. "There," she said, pointing. "Where?" "That spot." "There are like 4 spots that could be that spot." She pointed more precisely. "The one with the good wave view, but not too close to the loud music people." Logan looked. She wasn't wrong. It was a decent spot. Close enough to the water to hear it, far enough from the speakers to hold a conversation. He followed her across the sand, carrying the bag that somehow always ended up in his hands regardless of how the trip started. They set up. Towels, sunscreen. A 5-minute battle Logan won on technical points but lost on execution, since Sophie applied the sunscreen herself, and he was reasonably sure she missed most of her left arm. He let it go. He was getting better at letting things go. He sat down on his towel. Sophie dropped her shoes, picked up her bucket and shovel, and headed straight for the waterline without a backward glance, already absorbed in a project only she could see. Logan watched her go. He told himself he was relaxing, which wasn't entirely true. He was watching Sophie the way he always watched her in public spaces. Not anxiously, exactly, but with a consistent low-level attention that never fully switched off. He was aware of her position, aware of the water level, aware of the distance between them. It was automatic. It had been automatic for 3 years now. He pulled out a paperback he'd been meaning to finish for 2 months and stared at the same page for 12 minutes. He wasn't a man who relaxed easily. He knew this about himself. He'd known it even before Claire died, though her death had compressed something in him, made the stillness harder to find. He worked. He took care of Sophie. He made dinner and attended school events and helped with homework he sometimes had to quietly look up answers to on his phone. He saw his brother Derek on the weekends when Derek's schedule allowed. He went to the gym when he could and didn't go when he couldn't and felt guilty about neither. He did not, as a rule, take Saturdays off. His boss, a decent man named Hector, who ran the construction project Logan managed in Culver City, had looked at him on Friday afternoon and said, "You're taking tomorrow off." "I'm fine. You've been here 6 days straight." "There's a framing issue on the 3rd floor. Torres is handling the framing issue. Go to the beach. Take your kid." Hector had pointed at Logan like he was directing traffic. "You look like the drywall." So here he was, looking like the drywall, watching his daughter excavate what appeared to be a significant portion of the California coastline with a plastic shovel. He almost managed to relax. The commotion started around noon when the beach was at its fullest and most distracted. Logan heard it before he understood what it was. A sudden escalation in crowd noise, a shift from the general hum of summer activity to something sharper, more pointed. He looked up from his book in time to see a section of beach about 40 yards down erupt into movement. A large private cabana, the kind with actual walls and a full canopy, the kind you paid money to have set up professionally, had apparently been hit by a wave surge significantly larger than expected. The structure hadn't collapsed so much as it had been upended, tilting violently and scattering whatever was inside it across a wide radius of wet sand. Papers were everywhere, so actual paper documents, dozens of them, wheeling and spinning in the wind that had picked up off the water. A tablet had skidded across the sand. A leather bag had been knocked into the surf and was slowly being dragged by the retreating wave. And in the middle of all of it was a woman. She was trying to catch the papers. That was the first thing Logan registered. Not who she was or what she looked like, but simply that she was chasing documents across a public beach in a white cover-up with her hair soaked flat against her face, and she was losing the battle badly. Every time she grabbed for one page, two more skidded out of reach. The wind was not helping. The retreating wave had taken 3 or 4 sheets out past the breakers. What Logan noticed second was the crowd. Nobody was helping. They were watching. Some of them were laughing. A lot of them, and this was the part that settled something cold in his stomach, had their phones up. Recording, the way people recorded car accidents and public arguments and anything else that happened to someone else, and could therefore be safely observed without cost. A couple of paparazzi had materialized from somewhere that Logan hadn't previously registered as containing paparazzi. Apparently they'd been nearby already, which meant either they'd been tailing someone or the beach had a paparazzi problem he'd been unaware of. They were moving quickly now, cameras raised, jostling each other for position with the focused efficiency of people who understood that the window on something like this was short. Logan didn't think about it. He put the book down, stood up, and walked toward the situation. Later, Sophie would ask him why he did it, and he would have a hard time answering in a way that was satisfying. The honest answer was that it hadn't felt like a decision. It had felt like a correction. The way you automatically reached for something you'd knocked off a table before your brain had fully registered the motion. The woman was in trouble. Everyone around her was treating it like content. Logan had walked toward her instead. That was the whole of it. He reached the edge of the scattered papers first, before the paparazzi could close in entirely, and started picking them up. He didn't look at them. He didn't read them. He gathered them off the wet sand with the focused practicality of someone cleaning up a spill, folding them loosely to keep them together, moving toward the ones the wind was taking before they could reach the water. "Hey, those are..." The woman's voice was tight, clipped with stress and something else. Embarrassment, maybe. The particular kind that came from being visibly undone in a public space. "I know," Logan said. "I've got them. Don't worry about these, get the bag." She hesitated for half a second, then turned and waded into the shallows after the leather bag, which had gotten turned sideways in the surf and was waterlogged but recoverable. Logan kept moving, sweeping the last of the loose documents into his hands, and then, and this was the part he hadn't fully planned, he turned and put himself between the woman and the nearest photographer, not aggressively. He didn't touch anyone, didn't threaten anyone. He just stood there, a 6'1" man in a plain gray t-shirt, wide enough in the shoulders to be an effective physical obstacle, arms full of wet documents, watching the nearest photographer with an expression that said, "Without particular heat, this ends here." The photographer lowered his camera by about 6 inches. Not all the way, but enough. "There's nothing to see," Logan said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "It's a wave. It happened. It's over." He wasn't sure why that worked. Maybe because he wasn't angry. Maybe because the flat certainty in his voice was less interesting than the drama it was describing. Whatever the reason, the crowd began to lose its shape. People looking at their phones, drifting back to their own business, losing the thread of someone else's moment. The paparazzi took a few more shots with the professional reflex of people who couldn't help themselves, but the angle was wrong now, and the moment had passed. The woman came back from the shallows with the bag. It was dripping. Her cover-up was plastered to her. She was pushing wet hair out of her face with the back of her hand, and she was... Logan registered this now in a way he hadn't before. Genuinely shaken. Not performing distress. Actually rattled, in the specific way of someone who was used to controlling her environment and had just experienced a total and humiliating loss of that control. "These are yours," he said, and held out the documents. She took them. Her hands were slightly unsteady. "Thank you." A pause. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." Another pause. She seemed to be waiting for something, for him to say his name, to indicate in some way that he knew who she was, to ask for something. When none of that came, something shifted in her expression. Subtle. Hard to read. "I need to get somewhere less visible," she said, glancing past him at the lingering edge of the crowd. One of the paparazzi had pulled back but was still watching from a distance with the patience of someone who understood that the story might still develop. "There's a beach access path about 60 yards north," Logan said. "Takes you up to the public lot. Less foot traffic." She looked at him. How do you know that? I walked past it when we parked. She was quiet for a moment. Then, okay. He walked with her because she was moving in the direction of Sophie, and he wanted to check on Sophie. That was what he told himself. He held the recovered bag for her because it was heavy and dripping, and she was carrying the documents with both hands. He navigated them away from the remaining cluster of photographers because it was the practical path forward, and not because he was making any kind of statement. Sophie was still at the waterline, absorbed in her excavation project, which had evolved into what appeared to be a small canal system of considerable ambition. "1 second," Logan said, and veered off toward the water. "Sophie." She looked up, took in her father and the wet, serious-faced woman standing slightly behind him with the dripping bag. "Hi." "I'll be right back," Logan said. "Stay in this area, yeah? Don't go past the flag." Sophie considered the wet woman with frank, unselfconscious curiosity. "Did you fall in?" "Sort of," the woman said. "The waves are sneaky today," Sophie said, with the authority of someone who had been conducting water research for 2 hours. "I got hit twice." She pointed at her legs, which were indeed sand-crusted evidence of this. Then she went back to her canal. They walked north along the water's edge, past the thinning crowd, toward the path. Logan set the bag down on dry sand and squeezed water from the bottom seam. "It's soaked through," he said. "I know." She was holding the documents against her chest like she was cold. She was watching the water. Her jaw was tight. "Papers are fine," Logan said. "The ones I got to, anyway. The wave probably took 2 or 3 that were already in the surf." "3," she said. "I counted." "Anything critical on them?" A long pause. She looked at him sideways. "Potentially." "Then you should deal with that soon." "I know." She said it without irritation, which surprised him. Most people, told something obvious by a stranger, had at least a flicker of defensiveness. She just said, "I know," like she was agreeing with her own thoughts out loud. He picked up the bag and held it out to her. She took it, shifted the documents, and finally looked at him directly. She had dark eyes, tired-looking in a way that had nothing to do with the sun or the salt water, the kind of tired that came from somewhere farther in. "Thank you," she said again. "You already said that." "I know. I wanted to say it again." Logan nodded. There didn't seem to be anything else to add. He had a book he'd been meaning to finish, and a daughter engineering waterworks 40 yards down the beach. He turned to walk back. "I'm Ava," she said behind him. He stopped, turned halfway. "Logan?" She nodded slowly, shifted the bag on her shoulder. "Logan?" she repeated, like she was cataloging it. "Do you do this for a lot of people? Help them and then just walk away?" He thought about it. "I help my daughter and I'm pretty good at my job. Everything else I figure out as I go." She almost smiled. It didn't quite land, but the shape of it was there. "Okay," she said. "Go back to your daughter." He did. It was Sophie who put it together. They ate their packed lunch on the towels, sandwiches Logan had made that morning from whatever the refrigerator had offered, which was turkey on the last 2 pieces of bread before he needed to go shopping. And Sophie ate with one eye on the beach, the way she monitored everything, filing things away. "That was Ava Sterling," she said between bites. Logan unwrapped his sandwich. "What?" "The lady from the wave thing." Sophie was watching the middle distance with the casual certainty of someone delivering a known fact. "She's the one who made the phone app. My friend Lily's mom talks about her all the time. She's like really famous." Logan looked at the stretch of beach where Ava Sterling had been standing. She was gone. "Huh," he said. "You didn't know?" Sophie asked. "I didn't look her up." Sophie considered this. "Most people would have. I don't have that reflex." She ate her sandwich and seemed to accept this as consistent with everything she already knew about her father. "She said thank you twice," Sophie observed. "She did." "That means she really meant it." Logan ate his sandwich and squinted at the water. The kite man had finally gotten his kite airborne. It climbed in short, lurching ascents, struggling against a wind that didn't quite want it. "Don't read into it," he said. "I'm 8, Sophie said. "I'm not reading into anything. I'm just telling you what I saw." He looked at her. She was looking at the kite, expression perfectly neutral. He went back to his sandwich. He thought about it more than he expected on the drive home. Not about Ava Sterling specifically, not about who she was or what the papers had said or what it meant that one of the more photographed executives in the country had been standing on a public beach in a ruined cover-up watching him walk away. He thought about the crowd. He kept coming back to the crowd. All those phones. He understood it on a purely mechanical level. Something happens, you record it, the recording becomes a thing you share. The sharing becomes a way of saying, I was there. I witnessed this. The world noticed me noticing. He got it. He wasn't naive enough to pretend it was simply callousness, because it wasn't always that. People recorded because the culture had made recording the default response to anything unexpected. But there had been a woman on her knees in the wet sand, losing something that mattered to her, and the math of the crowd had decided that watching was easier than helping. Logan hadn't been particularly noble about it. He hadn't felt a surge of virtue. He'd just looked at the calculation and found it ugly and stepped outside it. He thought about Claire. He did that less than he used to, which was progress of a specific and melancholy variety. Not forgetting, just refiling, moving things from the place where they ambushed you to the place where you could choose to take them out and hold them and put them back. Claire would have helped too. She would have been in the water after that leather bag before Logan had processed what was happening. She'd had that quality, that reflexive extension toward people who needed something. Sophie had it too, maybe. The canal project had paused at one point because she'd noticed a small kid near the waterline who looked like he was about to cry, and she'd gone over and talked to him for 10 minutes until his mother found him. Logan hadn't taught her that. It was just in her. He merged onto the freeway in the thickening Saturday afternoon traffic and reached back to turn the air conditioning up because the car had gotten hot in a way that crept up on you. Dad, Sophie said. Yeah. Do you think she was okay, the lady? He considered it honestly. I think she's the kind of person who figures out how to be okay. Sophie seemed to think about this. But today was hard for her. Yeah, he said. Today was hard. Sophie turned back to the window. The city came back around them, the beach disappearing behind in the rear view, and they rode home in the medium-weight silence that meant she was thinking about something she hadn't finished understanding yet. Logan turned up the radio. An old song, something from before Sophie was born, before Claire was gone, before any of it. He turned it up until the sound filled the car and let the rest of it go for a while. He wasn't good at letting things go. He was working on it. The call came 4 days later. He was on the Culver City site, 3rd floor, reviewing the framing issue that Torres had mostly handled, but not entirely handled, when his phone vibrated with an unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. He had a policy about unknown numbers during work hours. He answered anyway. Is this Logan Pierce? Depends on who's asking. A pause, followed by something that was almost a laugh. That's fair. This is Ava Sterling. You helped me on the beach Saturday. Logan stepped back from the framing discussion and moved toward the edge of the floor, where the scaffolding opened up and the wind came through. Below, the site moved in its organized way. The sound of work, the back and forth of people doing things that mattered. I remember, he said. I got your number from the parking attendant at the lot on PCH. You left your name and number because you thought you'd scratched someone's car on the way out. A beat. You hadn't, by the way. I had them check. Good to know. I wanted to reach out properly. She said it in the tone of someone reading from a script they'd rehearsed but weren't entirely comfortable with. I'd like to thank you in person, the way you handled things on the beach. It helped more than you know. And I'd like to, if you're willing, do something to express that, something concrete. That's not necessary. I know it's not necessary. I'm doing it anyway. There was a slight edge in it. Not hostile, just firm. The voice of someone accustomed to being told no and proceeding regardless. What did you have in mind? Dinner. Wherever you'd like. I'd also like to... Another pause, shorter this time. I'd also like to apologize for how I behaved immediately afterward. You were trying to help and I was rude. Logan thought back. She'd been clipped, controlled, shaken. He hadn't registered it as rude. You weren't rude. I was distant, which I've been told is worse. He watched a beam being guided into position 4 floors below. 2 men with their hands up, talking the crane operator through it with short, precise gestures. "One dinner," he said, "and no gifts. You're negotiating with me over a dinner I'm offering. Is that strange? Everyone negotiates with me, usually over much larger things." She said it flat, without pride or complaint, just fact. "No gifts, dinner, fair enough." He gave her a weeknight that worked with Sophie's schedule, which required a brief negotiation with his sister-in-law about pickup. He hung up and stood on the scaffolding for a moment, watching the beams settle into place, listening to the sounds of things being built. He told himself it was just dinner. He wasn't entirely sure he believed himself. The restaurant was in West Hollywood, small and expensive in the way that small, expensive restaurants made their case through lighting and the silence of staff who had been trained not to interrupt. Logan wore the cleanest version of what he owned, which was dark jeans and a collared shirt that Sophie had approved of with the critical eye of a fashion consultant who had very recently learned what fashion was. "You look normal," she'd said, which he'd chosen to take as a compliment. Ava was already seated when he arrived, which told him she was the kind of person who arrived early to meetings she'd arranged. She'd traded the ruined beach cover-up for a dark blazer and a plain blouse that suggested she spent the first 10 minutes of most evenings talking herself out of wearing something more impressive. She looked different, pulled together in a way she hadn't been on the beach. Every piece of the public persona reassembled and properly secured. But she was turning her water glass in slow circles on the table when he sat down, a small, unconscious motion that the public persona hadn't entirely managed to suppress. "You found it," she said. "I can read addresses." She almost smiled. It got slightly further than the beach attempt. "Right, thank you for coming." "You already said that." "I know, I do that." She stopped turning the glass. "I repeat myself when I'm nervous. I'm aware of it." He sat with that for a second. "You're nervous." "I have 300 employees and I just testified before a congressional subcommittee. I'm almost never nervous." A pause. "This is strange for me." "What is?" She looked at him directly, the way she had on the beach. Direct but difficult to fully read, like a window that showed you one room of a house and none of the others. "Having dinner with someone who doesn't want anything from me." Logan picked up the menu. It was one of those menus without prices on it, which was a thing restaurants did when they assumed you already knew you could afford whatever was listed and didn't want the transaction to be visible. He found it slightly obnoxious. "How do you know I don't want anything?" he asked. "Because you refused the reward." "Maybe I'm playing a longer game." She considered this, studying him. "Are you?" "No," he said. "I just help people when they need it, and then I go back to what I was doing." "That's it." "That's it." She was quiet for a moment. The waiter materialized, took drink orders, disappeared. The restaurant held its murmured conversations around them, low and overlapping like a tide. "I looked you up," Ava said. It wasn't an apology. "I figured you would." "Logan Pierce, 32, construction project manager, Santa Monica." She paused. "Your wife died 3 years ago. Claire." He said it the way he always said it, with the particular quietness of a name you'd said so many times in so many different emotional registers that it had become its own complex thing. Not raw, not healed, just true. "I'm sorry," Ava said. "Thank you." "Your daughter, Sophie." "Yeah. She seems..." A pause. "When she said the waves were sneaky, that was..." Ava stopped, tried again. "She seemed like a good kid." "She's extraordinary," Logan said. "I take limited credit for that." For the first time that evening, Ava Sterling smiled for real. It arrived without announcement, slightly lopsided, and looked nothing like the controlled version he'd seen in whatever images of her existed on the internet. It lasted only a second. But it was different enough from everything else she'd shown him that he noticed it. The waiter came back. They ordered. The restaurant went on being expensive and quiet around them. "Tell me something," Logan said. "The papers? The documents? Were they as critical as you said?" Ava's expression shifted, not closing exactly, but tightening slightly at something behind her eyes. "Some of them," But you handled it. I handle things. She picked up her water glass. That's mostly what I do. Things go wrong, and then I handle them. It's an exhausting way to live, but I've never found a better system. Have you tried having a system that doesn't start with things going wrong? She looked at him across the table with an expression he couldn't entirely read. You're more direct than I expected. Should I not be? No. She set the glass down. No, She stopped, looked at her hands briefly, then back at him. I actually don't know what to do with direct. I'm used to people managing what they say to me. They either want something or they don't want to upset me. Both of those things make people very careful. A beat. You're not careful. I'm careful about things that matter, Logan said. Whether I offend a billionaire at dinner doesn't make the list. She stared at him. Then she laughed. An actual unguarded laugh, quick and surprised, like something she hadn't planned for. It disappeared quickly, but it left something behind in the quality of the silence between them. Fair enough, she said. They ate dinner. The food was good. The conversation wandered from the beach to his work to hers. She was direct about the company in a way that told him she was used to pitching it, to making the narrative sharp and efficient. He asked questions that weren't the questions interviewers asked. She gave answers that were different from the ones she gave interviewers. At one point, she started to explain a technical architecture decision and stopped herself, apologizing, and he told her not to stop, that he was following it. She looked at him with the mildly suspicious expression of someone being told something they wanted to believe but hadn't verified. Most people's eyes glaze over, she said. I manage projects. I live in systems. It's not the same. No, he agreed. But I like understanding how things work. She talked for 5 minutes, uninterrupted, about something intricate and specific that Logan followed about 70% of. He asked a question at the end. It was a decent question. He could tell because she tilted her head slightly and said, huh, before answering. By the time the check came, which Ava signed without ceremony or performance, the restaurant had emptied to its late-night regulars. They stood on the sidewalk outside in the warm July dark. This was good, Ava said. It came out slightly formal, like she was reading a rating. Yeah, Logan said. A pause. Sophie, does she... Ava stopped, tried a different approach. Is she doing okay? After everything. She has bad nights sometimes, Logan said. She's had a lot of good ones lately. A pause. She watches YouTube. Your company made the thing she watches it on. Ava absorbed this. I didn't build the hardware. I know, but she'd probably think it was cool. Something crossed Ava's face then. A kind of stillness that wasn't the controlled stillness she maintained in public. Something more undefended. She recovered from it quickly, smoothed it back under the general architecture of who she was in the world. I'll see you again, she said. Not a question. Probably, Logan said. She nodded, the way people nodded when they didn't have a better word for something they'd decided. Then she walked to her car, and he walked to his, and the Los Angeles summer night closed around both of them in its separate ways. In his car, Logan sat for a moment before starting the engine. Through the windshield, the city ran its usual current of light and movement. A siren somewhere in the distance, the red and white flow of traffic on the street. He thought about Sophie's canal project, which she had described in precise detail on the way home from the beach, and how she'd explained exactly how she'd solved the problem of water flowing the wrong direction. He thought about the crowd with their phones. He thought about Ava Sterling saying, I repeat myself when I'm nervous. He started the car. He drove home. The city went on behind him, indifferent and bright, the way cities are, carrying everything and remembering nothing, leaving the remembering to the people moving through it. The second dinner was Sophie's idea, not directly. Sophie hadn't said you should invite Ava Sterling to dinner. What she'd said on a Tuesday evening while Logan was making pasta and she was supposedly doing homework at the kitchen table was, if you were going to be friends with someone who was really different from you, how would you even start? Logan stirred the sauce. What do you mean different? Like, different life, different everything. You just start, he said. Same as any other way. Sophie wrote something in her notebook. That's not very specific. Most true things aren't. She chewed her pencil in a way he'd told her not to. Is Ava Sterling your friend now? He turned from the stove. She was looking at her homework with the studied innocence of someone who had constructed the question very carefully and was now pretending it had been casual. We had dinner once, he said. You came home different. I came home the same. You hummed in the shower the next morning. He turned back to the stove. I always hum in the shower. You hummed the same 3 songs, Sophie said. You were humming something new. He didn't answer that. He served the pasta. They ate. Sophie finished her homework and went to bed without pressing the issue further, which meant she was satisfied she'd made her point. Logan washed the dishes and thought, without particularly wanting to, about the way Ava had laughed at the restaurant. Quick and surprised, like something she hadn't budgeted for. He texted her the next day. Sophie wants to know if you'd come to dinner. She'd never admit she wants to know that, but she does. He stared at it for a full minute before sending it. Then he sent it and put the phone face down on his desk and went back to the site plans. She replied 20 minutes later. What does Logan want? He picked up the phone, put it down again, picked it up, typed, Logan is making tacos on Friday, and there's enough for 3. She replied immediately this time. I'll bring something. You don't need to. I know. What does Sophie like? He thought about it. Anything that doesn't look like it came from a grocery store. She's very interested in food that has a story. A longer pause, then, I know a place in Koreatown that makes these honey cakes that allegedly have a 40-year-old recipe. Will that do? That'll do. Ava arrived on Friday with the honey cakes in a plain white box and the specific discomfort of someone who didn't regularly enter other people's apartments. Not rudeness, she wasn't rude, but a kind of careful attention to where she stood and what she touched, like she was cataloging the space and wasn't sure yet what its rules were. The apartment was what it was. Logan had cleaned it, which mostly meant relocating the controlled clutter of a single-parent household to places that were technically out of sight. Sophie's drawings covered a section of the kitchen wall, taped up in an arrangement that had started as organized and evolved into something more geological, layer upon layer, the older ones visible at the edges of the newer ones. A bookshelf in the living room held an uneven mixture of Logan's paperbacks and Sophie's chapter books, and a binder of medical forms from the pediatrician that he kept meaning to file properly. Ava stood in the entryway holding the cake box, taking it in. It's small, Logan said. It's real, she said. It came out quietly, not like a compliment she'd prepared. Sophie came out of her bedroom before Logan could respond, assessed Ava with the frank appraisal she applied to everything new, and said, Is that from Koreatown? Ava blinked. How did you... Dad said you were bringing something with a story. Sophie pointed at the box. That looks like a story box. Ava looked at Logan. He shrugged. She's like this. The lady at the shop told me the recipe came from her grandmother, Ava said, crouching slightly to be more at Sophie's level, which was something adults either did naturally or didn't do at all, and Sophie always noticed which kind she was dealing with. Her grandmother brought it from Seoul in 1987. She made them in her apartment on a hot plate for 3 years before she could afford the shop. Sophie took the box with both hands. The way she handled things she considered important. That's a good story. I thought so too. They ate tacos at the kitchen table, which was the right size for 2 and slightly tight for 3, which meant elbows occasionally competed for territory and the salsa bowl had to be passed with some coordination. Ava had changed out of whatever she'd been wearing for work into dark jeans and a sweater that looked like it had been expensive once and had since been worn enough to forgive. She was better at the kitchen table than she'd been at the restaurant, more comfortable with informality than Logan had expected, or maybe just more tired, the professional scaffolding slightly harder to maintain by the end of a Friday. Sophie asked her questions the way Sophie asked everyone questions, directly, without apology, following the thread wherever it went. Do you have kids? No. Do you want them? Sophie, Logan started. It's okay, Ava said. She turned her water glass in a slow circle, the same small motion from the restaurant Logan noticed. I don't know, she said to Sophie. I've been busy enough that it hasn't felt like a question I needed to answer yet. How old are you? 30? Sophie appeared to do math. My dad's 32. That's only 2 years. Sophie, Logan said in a different tone. Sophie looked at him with the perfect composure of someone who had no idea what she'd implied. I'm just saying the math. Ava pressed her lips together in a way that was clearly suppressing something. After dinner, Sophie asked Ava to look at her drawings. This was not a small thing. Sophie was particular about who she showed them to and how, and she narrated the showing with the focused seriousness of an artist explaining her work to a collector. Ava sat on the living room floor because that was where Sophie set up the relevant drawings for review, and she looked at each one for an actual amount of time before saying anything. Not polite glances. Real attention. Logan stood in the kitchen doorway and watched. This one, Sophie said, pointing to a drawing of a building with very large windows and a tree growing through the middle of it. I couldn't decide if the tree should be inside or outside, so I made it both. That's an engineering problem, Ava said. It's a story problem, Sophie corrected. Both, Ava said. Those are usually the same. Sophie looked at her with the specific expression she reserved for adults who surprised her. Then she moved to the next drawing. Later, after Sophie had gone to bed, later than she should have, because the conversation had stretched in directions no one had planned, Logan made coffee and Ava sat at the kitchen table and they talked in the particular quiet of an apartment at night with a child asleep in it. She's not what I expected, Ava said. What did you expect? I don't know, a smaller version of a person. She is a smaller version of a person. No, she's... Ava stopped, looking for the right words. She thinks like an adult, but she's still completely herself. Most adults lose that. They start thinking like adults, and they stop being themselves. Logan poured coffee and set a mug in front of her. Claire was like that too. She never lost the... He paused. She stayed curious about everything. She'd get excited about things the way Sophie does. He sat down. I don't know if Sophie got it from watching her or if it's just who Sophie is. Probably both, Ava said. Yeah, probably. Ava held the mug with both hands, which made her look younger than she had at the restaurant. Do you talk about her a lot? Claire? Not as much as I should, probably. He drank his coffee. At first, I talked about her too much. Overcompensating, the grief counselor said. Then I talked about her too little. There's a calibration issue I haven't fully solved. Grief counselor. Sophie's idea, actually. She was 6. He said it with the complicated pride of a parent who'd been helped by his child. She said, Dad, I think we need to talk to someone because we're both sad in the same way and we can't help each other. I didn't know where that came from. Ava looked at the ceiling briefly. Yeah. They sat in the quiet. It was the kind of quiet that had enough in it to be comfortable. Not the empty kind. Not the kind that asked you to fill it, but the kind that meant two people were comfortable enough with each other's presence that silence didn't require maintenance. Can I tell you something? Ava said. Sure. She didn't say it right away. She drank her coffee and seemed to be deciding how honest she wanted to be, checking the architecture of the thing before committing to it. I go home most nights to a penthouse that has 4,000 square feet and costs more per month than most people make in a year. And I make dinner, which I'm mediocre at, and I eat it at a kitchen island that seats 8 people, alone. A pause. I've eaten at that island alone probably 300 times. And tonight I ate tacos at a table the size of a cutting board with a man I barely know and his 8-year-old daughter, and it was... She stopped. What? More like something, she said. He didn't say anything immediately. He thought about the right response and decided the right response was honesty. The table's too small, he said. I keep meaning to get a bigger one. Don't, she said, and there was something in it that wasn't a joke. He didn't push it. She finished her coffee. He walked her to the door. She said goodnight in the careful way she'd said everything at the beginning of the evening, before the kitchen table and the drawings on the floor had quietly dismantled some of the distance. He closed the door and stood in the entryway for a moment. Sophie's voice came from down the hall. She stayed for 2 hours. You're supposed to be asleep. I was listening. That's not better. A pause. I like her. Good night, Sophie. She hums too, when she thought we weren't listening, by the bookshelf. Good night. Just saying? It became a pattern, without anyone officially making it a pattern. Texts first, brief and practical, in the way of 2 people who didn't have time for anything else. Ava sent things she'd seen that she thought Sophie would like. An article about a woman who built houses out of recycled materials, a photo of a building in Japan with a highway going through its middle floors. Sophie, who had been given limited access to Logan's phone for exactly this purpose after some negotiation about terms and limits, replied with her own finds, drawings of buildings she'd invented or questions that had occurred to her that she needed answered. Does water remember where it's been? She'd sent once at 7:45 on a Wednesday morning. Ava had replied scientifically no, but I think maybe yes. Logan had stared at that exchange for longer than he'd meant to. The three of them went to a farmer's market on a Saturday in August. It was Sophie's idea, and nobody pretended otherwise. Ava wore sunglasses and a hat, which helped about 30% against recognition, and they moved through the stalls in the particular slow way of people who had nowhere to be and no schedule to keep, which was unusual enough for both Logan and Ava that it took them each 20 minutes to settle into it. Sophie navigated on her own terms, stopping at whatever held her attention. She spent 11 minutes at a stall run by an older man who made ceramic pots, asking him about his process with the intensity of an apprentice. She bought a small lopsided bowl with her own money, saved from allowance, that the man told her was imperfect. It's more perfect for being imperfect, Sophie had told him, and he'd looked at her like she'd said something surprising. She negotiates like a CEO, Ava murmured to Logan, watching. She gets it from her mother's side. They bought coffee from a cart and walked through the market with cups in hand, and for 20 minutes they didn't talk about anything. Not business, not grief, not the complicated geometry of what they were to each other. They walked and drank coffee, and Sophie ran slightly ahead and came back to report things, and the morning held itself up around them. This is what I forget, Ava said. What? That time can just move like this, without anything happening in it. Things are happening, Logan said. Sophie just bought a bowl. You know what I mean. He did. When did you last take a vacation? She thought about it with genuine concentration, which was its own answer. There was a week in Tokyo 3 years ago, but I was working most of it. That's not a vacation. I know. She drank her coffee. I keep telling myself I'll figure out the balance later. When the company is more stable. When this quarter is done. When it doesn't work like that. She looked at him sideways. You say things like you know them. I used to do the same thing, Logan said. I was going to be less busy after this project, after this deadline. Then Claire got sick, and there was no more after, and I understood what I'd been doing. He paused. The farmer's market noise moved around them. I'm not saying it to lecture you. I'm saying it because I did it, and it cost me. Ava was quiet for a moment. How sick was she? 18 months from diagnosis. He kept his voice level, the way he'd learned to. She went fast at the end. Were you there? Yeah. Ava looked at the ground ahead of them. I'm sorry. You don't have to keep apologizing for things that weren't yours. I know, She stopped. I think I say sorry because I don't have another word for I wish that hadn't happened to you. He looked at her. She was still looking ahead, but her jaw had the tight-set quality it got when she was working through something internal that she hadn't decided yet whether to say out loud. That works, he said, as translations go. She glanced at him briefly, nodded. Sophie came running back to show them a flower she'd been given by a woman at one of the stalls, holding it up with the focused triumph of someone presenting evidence. They walked back to the car in the late morning heat, Sophie between them, describing the ceramic potman's firing technique in more technical detail than either adult had expected. What nobody said, what nobody needed to say, because the shape of it was already visible to anyone paying attention, was that something was changing. It wasn't the obvious thing. It wasn't attraction in the clean, simple sense, though Logan wasn't naive about what he felt when he was around her, and Ava wasn't naive about much. It was something with more weight to it, the specific kind of gravity that develops between people who have shown each other things they don't normally show. Not because they planned to, but because the setting kept disarming them before they could stop it. Ava came over 3 more times in August, twice for dinners that Sophie had essentially engineered, and once, unexpectedly, on a Thursday evening, because she'd had a terrible meeting and had been driving in no particular direction and had ended up parked outside his building, which she described to him on the phone as a logistical accident. "Come up," he'd said. "I don't want to intrude." Sophie's already asleep. "Come up." She'd come up. She'd sat on his couch with her shoes off and her blazer over the arm of the chair and told him about the meeting in flat, factual language that was clearly edited down from the emotional reality. Someone on her board was pushing for a strategic direction she didn't agree with. There was pressure from outside investors. A competitor was moving aggressively in a market she'd spent 2 years building. Logan had listened. He'd asked a few questions, not about the business specifics, because he wasn't pretending to expertise he didn't have, but about the actual problem at the center of it. What she wanted versus what she was being pushed toward. What she'd do if the board pressure went away. Whether she trusted herself. She'd looked at him when he asked that last question. "That's a strange thing to ask." "Is it? Most people assume I trust myself. It's kind of the default assumption about someone in my position." "Well, most people are wrong about most things," Logan said. "Do you?" A long pause. The apartment was quiet. Sophie's nightlight made a faint glow under her door. "I trust my instincts about the company," Ava said carefully. "I trust my judgment about technology and timing. I trust my read on most people in a room." She stopped. "But I don't always trust myself about—" She moved her hand in a vague gesture that encompassed the couch, the apartment, the two of them sitting in it. "This. What's this?" She looked at him. The question sat in the air between them with all of its actual weight. "I don't know yet," she said. He nodded. "Let it rest there. You want more coffee?" "Yes," she said. "Please." He made coffee. She stayed another hour. They talked about smaller things. A book he'd recommended that she'd actually read. A building Sophie had described in a drawing that Ava had been quietly trying to figure out the structural logic of for 2 weeks. When she left, she paused in the doorway. "Logan." "Yeah. Thank you for—" She stopped. "You don't make me feel like what I am. You make me feel like who I am." He stood in the doorway. The hallway light behind her was the unflattering fluorescent of apartment buildings everywhere. She looked tired and real and nothing like the version of herself that existed in press photos. "Those should probably be the same thing," he said. "For most people they are," she said. "For me they haven't been in a long time." She left. He stood in the doorway for a moment after she was gone, listening to the building's night sounds. The elevator, a television somewhere down the hall, the ambient murmur of other people's ordinary lives. He went back inside. He stood at the kitchen counter and didn't make himself more coffee because he didn't need it, and he looked at Sophie's drawings on the wall, the building with the tree growing through it, the one that was inside and outside at the same time, and thought about what Ava had said. Those should probably be the same thing. He thought about Claire, the way Claire had always been completely herself regardless of context, board meeting or beach or 3 a.m. when Sophie was sick with a fever. How that had been one of the things that had first stopped him. That radical consistency. The same person in every room. He'd been good at that once. He wasn't sure when he'd gotten out of the habit. Somewhere in the years after Claire, the part of himself that occupied professional space and the part that came home had drifted apart without him noticing, until they ran on parallel tracks that rarely crossed. He turned off the kitchen light. He checked on Sophie out of habit. She was asleep on her side, the imperfect ceramic bowl she'd bought at the farmer's market sitting on her nightstand next to her water cup, for reasons only she understood. He pulled her door almost shut and went to bed. He didn't hum in the shower the next morning. He thought about what he'd said to Ava about doing things before it was too late, and how you couldn't take your own advice until you'd finished failing to take it. He was working on it. That was true. And for the first time in a long time, the working felt like it might actually be getting somewhere. September came in hot and stayed that way. Logan noticed the change in Ava gradually, the way you noticed weather shifting. Not one moment, but an accumulation of small signals that only made sense in retrospect. She was distracted in a way she hadn't been before. Her texts came later in the day and were shorter. When she came to dinner the second week of September, she ate half her food and spent 10 minutes staring at Sophie's drawings on the wall, with an expression that wasn't really seeing them. Sophie noticed too. She was quieter than usual that evening, watching Ava with the careful attention she gave things that weren't quite right yet. After Sophie went to bed, Logan put 2 mugs of coffee on the table and sat down across from Ava and said, "What's happening?" Not a question. She'd learned by then that he did that, flattened things that other people would have softened into questions because he wasn't interested in giving her an easy exit. Something at work. She wrapped her hands around the mug. "It's probably nothing." "You don't believe that." A pause. "No? Tell me." She looked at him. "It's complicated. I have time." What came out over the next 40 minutes was this. Someone had accessed a secure partition of Sterling Technologies' internal server, the one that held early-stage acquisition targets, pending patent filings, and the architectural framework for a product they were 18 months from announcing. The breach had been quiet, professional, the kind of thing done by someone who knew exactly where to look, which meant it was either an outside actor with inside information or someone inside the company directly. Her head of security had brought it to her 48 hours ago. She'd told 3 people, her general counsel, her head of security, and now Logan. "You told me before your lawyer," Logan said. "My lawyer's going to tell me what I can and can't say. You're going to tell me what I should actually do." She said it flatly, like it was obvious. "There's a difference." Logan drank his coffee. "Do you know who it was?" "Not yet. We're narrowing it." She turned the mug, turned it back. "The timing is what bothers me. There's a competitor, a man named Richard Voss. His company has been trying to get into the same market we're targeting for 2 years. He doesn't have the technology. We do. If he got access to our architecture, he wouldn't need to build it. He could reverse engineer enough to file patents, muddy the water, delay our launch." Her voice had gone to the flat professional register she used when she was keeping emotion out of the room. "It would cost us the lead we've spent 3 years building." "You think Voss is behind the breach?" "I think Voss is behind everything bad that's happened to this company in the last 18 months. A pause. "I just can't prove it." Logan looked at her across the table. She had the particular look of someone who'd been carrying something alone for too long and was only now putting it down long enough to feel how heavy it had been. "You need to tell your board," he said. "If I tell the board, it leaks. It always leaks." She shook her head. "One of them is already in Voss's corner. I don't know which one." "Then you need to find out which one before you say anything." "I know." She looked down. "I know all of this. I've run the logic 40 times. I just—" She stopped. I wanted to say it out loud to someone who wasn't going to immediately turn it into a legal document or a strategy memo. He nodded. "Okay. Okay. You said it out loud. How does it feel?" She considered that with unexpected seriousness. "Worse, but more real. That's usually how it works." She left that night with the same weight on her, but she was holding it differently, upright instead of sideways, which was small but mattered. Logan stood at the window after she was gone and watched her car move through the parking lot and thought about Richard Voss, a name he hadn't known 2 hours ago and now couldn't stop turning over. He didn't know anything about the man, but he knew the type. He'd worked enough construction projects to know the difference between a competitor and a predator, and what Ava had described wasn't competition. It was calculated demolition. He went to bed and didn't sleep well, which was new. He'd been sleeping better lately. He noticed the loss of it. The story broke on a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week of September. Logan was on the site in Culver City, reviewing a change order with the electrical sub, when his phone started vibrating with enough frequency to suggest something had happened. He stepped away from the conversation, looked at the screen, and felt the floor of the morning drop. His name was in the headline. Not featured, not the main event, but there, embedded in the 3rd paragraph of a breaking story on 3 different news sites that had apparently coordinated their timing. The headline varied by outlet, but the substance was the same. Sterling Technologies faces internal leak scandal. Sources allege insider connection. And inside those articles, his name. Logan Pierce, identified as a close personal associate of Ava Sterling, described in language that stopped just short of an accusation but planted the implication with surgical precision. Language about access, language about timing, language about a man with no visible means of affiliation to the tech industry who had nonetheless developed a sudden and conspicuous proximity to one of its most powerful figures. He read it twice. Then he put his phone in his pocket and finished the conversation with the electrical sub, because the change order still needed to be resolved and the building didn't stop because someone had put his name in a newspaper. The texts started coming in while he was doing that. Derek first. What is this? Call me. Then two numbers he didn't recognize. Then Hector, carefully. Take whatever time you need today. Then a number he did recognize, Ava's. But the message was just, I'm calling you in 10 minutes. Please answer. He answered. I saw it, he said. Her voice was tight and controlled in a way he recognized as the version of her that had already processed the panic and was operating on the other side of it. Logan, I need you to know this didn't come from me, and it didn't come from anyone I directed. Someone leaked your name to create a false narrative, and I am... A pause, very brief, during which he could hear her working to stay level. I am furious, and I am sorry. Stop apologizing. I will not stop. Ava, he said it quietly. It's okay. I'm not... He stopped, checked himself. I'm not okay, actually. I need to know what's happening. A breath. Richard Voss. His PR operation fed this to 3 outlets simultaneously. My security team traced the origin 2 hours ago. It's the same pattern he used against a competitor in 2019. Plant a peripheral figure, make the implication, let social media build the story into something bigger than the facts. Her voice tightened further. You're the peripheral figure. I know what I am. A silence that had something painful in it. That's not... I know, he said. I know that's not what you meant. I'm saying I understand the mechanics. He moved away from the site entrance into a quieter corner of the parking area. What happens now? My legal team is preparing a statement. I'm going to address it publicly. Don't. Logan, if you address it publicly right now, you make it bigger. You make it look like there's something to address. He'd been doing construction long enough to know how structural problems worked. Sometimes the more you reinforced the wrong thing, the faster the whole thing came down. What does your security team have? Enough to know Voss is behind the breach. Not enough to prove it in a room where it matters. Then find enough. I'm working on it. How long? I don't know. A week? Maybe 2? He looked at the building across from him, the one his crew had been working on for 4 months. The framing was solid. The bones were right. Whatever happened to the exterior, whatever pressure came at it, the thing in the middle would hold. Okay, he said. Logan, I'll be fine, he said. Focus on the breach. He hung up and stood in the parking lot for a moment. Then he went back to work. The week that followed was the ugliest of his life since the week Claire died, and the comparison itself, that he had to reach back 3 years to find a reference point, told him something about how bad it was. The apartment building story ran by Thursday. Someone had found his address. Not hard. He'd never had reason to hide it. And by Friday morning, there were 2 photographers in the parking lot. He took Sophie to school using the back stairs and a route that added 8 minutes to the walk. And he did it without explaining why, just making it a different kind of morning. And Sophie didn't ask because Sophie was old enough to understand that something was wrong and old enough to know that asking about it directly would make it harder for him. She was 8. She was doing that. It made something in his chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with the photographers. At work, Hector pulled him into the site office and closed the door. Tell me what I need to know. None of it is true. Hector looked at him for a long moment, the steady look of a man who'd managed people long enough to read them accurately. I know that, he said. I'm asking what you need from me. Logan felt something release slightly in his chest. Just keep me working. Done. Social media was a different problem and one he had less control over. He didn't have accounts, had never had accounts. But Derek showed him what was being said, because Derek believed that knowing the worst was better than being ambushed by it. The narrative had found its shape within 48 hours. Logan Pierce, a construction worker from Santa Monica, had used proximity to Ava Sterling to extract and sell information. The story had texture now, the kind that came from dozens of people adding their own details, their own interpretations, their own certainties about a man none of them had ever met. Gold digger was the word that appeared most often. He read it enough times that it stopped meaning anything, just a sound, a shape in text, something other people needed to say. What it actually did was isolate him in a way he hadn't anticipated. Not from the people who knew him, Derek, Hector, the crew, his sister-in-law Maggie, who called on Friday and said, "I don't want to hear your explanation because I don't need one," but from the general texture of moving through the world. The way people looked at him at the grocery store, the second glance at the school gate pickup, the awareness that his name was now a searchable thing attached to a story that wasn't his. He called Ava on Saturday morning. Sophie was at Maggie's for the day, which she'd been told was a regular play date and which Maggie had arranged because she understood the situation without being asked. "How are you holding up?" Ava said. "I'm fine." "Don't." "What?" "Don't say fine when I'm asking directly." Her voice had the quality it had at the kitchen table, the real one, not the press conference one. "I put you in this. I'm asking honestly." He sat on the couch in the empty apartment. The quiet of it felt different today. Not the comfortable quiet of a Saturday without obligations, but the quiet of something having been taken out of the room. "I'm angry," he said. "I'm angrier than I expected to be. I keep trying to be rational about it, and then I think about Sophie and—" He stopped. "What about Sophie?" "She's going to hear it eventually," he said. "She's going to search my name one day and find this, and I don't—" He stopped again, pressed his hand flat against his knee. "I can handle it landing on me. I don't know how to handle it landing on her." Ava was quiet on the other end of the line for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, stripped of the controlled precision she usually maintained. Raw at the edge. "Logan, I promise you, don't promise me things you can't guarantee." "I can guarantee this one." A pause. "I'm close. My security team found a thread yesterday. There's an executive inside my company who's been feeding Voss information. We're building the case now. When we have it, and we will have it, this comes apart. All of it." He absorbed this. "Who?" "I can't say yet. If it leaks before we're ready—" "I understand." He did. "How long?" "A week. Maybe less." Another pause, shorter. "Can you hold on for a week?" He looked at the wall. Sophie's drawings. The building with the tree growing through it, inside and outside at once. "Yeah," he said. "I can hold on." He almost broke on the Tuesday. It started with a parent at Sophie's school. A woman he'd spoken to maybe 4 times in 2 years, whose name he knew and whose face he recognized, and with whom he'd had the standard exchanges of schoolgate parents, weather, pickup times, the quality of the cafeteria pizza. She'd been normal pleasant to him the way most people at the school were normal pleasant, which was to say professionally warm and fundamentally neutral. On Tuesday, she looked at him across the school gate, and she looked away first, deliberately. The specific physics of someone choosing not to see a person they've decided has done something wrong. He was used to being looked at now. The lingering second glance, the slight recalibration. But this was different. This was someone who'd made a judgment and settled into it. He picked up Sophie, walked home the long way. "You're quiet," Sophie said about halfway back. "Just thinking." A pause. "About the stuff online." He stopped walking. She was a half step ahead of him and turned to look back when he stopped, her backpack making her slightly top-heavy, her lopsided ponytail back in force. "You know about that," he said. "Lily's older brother told her and she told me." Sophie said it plainly, without drama. "He said you sold secrets to someone. I said that was wrong because you don't care about money that much." Logan crouched down to her level, on the sidewalk, with the afternoon traffic going past. "Lily's brother is wrong," he said. "I didn't sell anything to anyone." "I know, Dad." "I want to make sure you know." "I know," she said again, with the patience she reserved for things that didn't require patience. "I know you. Secrets aren't—" That's not a thing you would do. He looked at her. 8 years old, backpack straps, lopsided ponytail, absolute certainty. Some people think it might be, he said. You might hear more of that. Then they don't know you, she said simply. And that's their problem. He stood up. They walked the rest of the way home without talking, and he made dinner, and Sophie did homework and then read at the kitchen table while he cleaned up. And the apartment was normal in all the external ways. The smell of food, the sound of pages turning, the specific domestic ordinary of a Tuesday night. But Logan was standing at the sink washing dishes and thinking about what it cost to be in someone's orbit when that orbit became dangerous. He'd walked toward Ava on that beach without thinking about cost, and the cost had been nothing. A few minutes, some wet papers, the inconvenience of being helpful. He hadn't known then that the orbit had a gravitational pull to it, that getting close to something that big meant getting pulled into whatever forces were acting on it. He wasn't angry at Ava. He knew the difference between someone who'd caused him harm and someone in whose proximity harm had arrived. But he was honest enough with himself to recognize that the distinction was somewhat academic when you were the one standing in the damage. By Wednesday evening, the photographers outside his building had been there long enough to feel permanent, and he'd developed the reflex of checking the parking lot from the fourth-floor window before going down, the way you developed any survival reflex. Gradually, without noticing, until it was just what you did. He was in the kitchen when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go. Something made him answer. Logan Pierce? A man's voice, clipped, professional. Who's asking? My name is James Harlow. I represent Richard Voss. I'm calling because Mr. Voss believes this situation has gotten unnecessarily messy and he'd like to extend an opportunity to resolve it cleanly. A pause calibrated to feel like generosity. He's prepared to make a statement clarifying your non-involvement in the leak, clearing your name publicly, in exchange for a conversation with you about the nature of your relationship with Ava Sterling. Logan stood very still. He wants information, Logan said. He wants clarity. There's a difference. There isn't. Logan kept his voice even. Tell your client I'm not interested. Mr. Pierce, tell him whatever he thinks he's getting from me doesn't exist because I don't operate that way. A pause. And tell him his name is going to have a very bad week. He hung up. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, very still, the phone in his hand. Then he called Ava. She picked up on the second ring. Logan? Voss just called me, he said, through a lawyer named Harlow. He wants information about you in exchange for a public clearing of my name. Silence. Then, he called you directly. His lawyer did. That means he's rattled. Her voice had changed, sharpened, the way it did when she moved from processing to action. That means we're closer than I thought. I told him no. I know you did. A pause. Logan, don't thank me. I wasn't going to thank you. I was going to say... She stopped. When she came back, her voice had something in it he hadn't heard before, something unguarded and slightly broken at the edge, like a structure that had been under pressure for too long. I was going to say that I'm sorry this is what knowing me has cost you. I know that's not enough. I know sorry doesn't... Ava, he said it quietly. Stop. I can't just... You said a week. How close are you? A breath. We have him. We have the executive. His name is Marcus Webb. He's been my head of strategic development for 3 years. He's been feeding Voss information for 14 months. We have the transfers, we have the communications, we have enough to take to the board, the SEC, and a courtroom. Her voice was level, but underneath it there was something shaking slightly, the way a very tightly held thing shakes when the grip finally starts to ease. I need 3 more days to make sure the package is complete. Then we go public. 3 days, Logan said. 3 days. He looked at Sophie's wall of drawings, the imperfect ceramic bowl on her bedroom nightstand, the life he'd built inside this apartment, piece by piece, out of whatever the years had left him after Claire. Imperfect, listing slightly to one side, sufficient. Then I'm ending this, Ava said. It came out quiet, but absolute. the voice of someone who had made a decision past the point of reconsidering it. I'm ending it publicly and completely, and I'm going to make sure your name is untouchable when it's done. You don't owe me that. I know I don't owe you that. A pause. I'm doing it because I want to. There's a difference. He almost said there isn't. He caught it. 3 days, he said instead. 3 days, she confirmed. Don't answer any more calls from numbers you don't know. Little late for that advice. I know. I'm sorry. A pause. Logan? Yeah. How's Sophie? He looked toward her bedroom door, the nightlight glow at the base of it. She told me that people who think I do this don't know me, and that's their problem. A silence on the line, long enough that he wondered if the call had dropped. She said that, Ava said finally. 8 years old. Another silence. Smaller this time. She's right, Ava said. She's completely right. He didn't say anything. The apartment held its night sounds around him. The building settling, a television somewhere down the hall, the far-off sound of traffic on the street. The ordinary sounds of a life that had been interrupted and was waiting, with the particular patience of things that knew their own worth, to resume. Get some sleep, he said. You too. He put the phone down and stood in the kitchen for a long moment. Then he turned off the light and went to check on Sophie and went to bed. He didn't sleep much, but he lay still, which was close enough. 3 days. He could hold on for 3 days. He'd held on through worse. The 3 days passed the way bad stretches of time always passed. Not quickly, not slowly, but with a grinding texture that made each hour feel like something that had to be manually gotten through. Logan worked. He took Sophie to school and picked her up and made dinner and helped with homework and did all the ordinary mechanical things of a functioning life, and underneath all of it ran the low, constant hum of waiting. He'd told Ava 3 days. She'd said 3 days. He was holding to that the way you held to a fixed point when everything around it was moving, not because he was certain it would resolve cleanly, but because he needed something to aim at. On the second day, Derek came over uninvited with a six-pack and the stated intention of watching whatever game was on. Logan suspected the game was a cover story, and Derek actually wanted to check on him, which was a Derek thing to do. He was not a man who said, "I'm worried about you," when he could instead say, "I heard there's a good matchup tonight." They watched the game. Derek drank 2 beers and Logan drank 1, and Sophie fell asleep on the couch halfway through the second quarter with her head on Derek's arm and her feet on Logan's leg, which was a logistical arrangement nobody had planned, but nobody moved to change. "She seems okay," Derek said quietly during a commercial. "She's better than okay," Logan said. "What about you?" "I'm getting there." Derek looked at the sleeping Sophie, then at Logan. "This woman, Ava Sterling." He said it carefully, the way he said things he'd been turning over for a while. "Is she worth it?" Logan considered the question honestly. "She didn't do this to me. That's not what I asked." He looked at his daughter's face, slack with sleep, completely unguarded the way children were only when they weren't aware of being watched. "Yeah," he said. "She's worth it." Derek nodded slowly, once, like he was filing something. He didn't push further. That was also a Derek thing. He asked the one question he needed answered, and then let it go. They watched the rest of the game in the quiet of the apartment, Sophie asleep between them, and Logan felt the knot in his chest loosen by 1 degree, which wasn't nothing, else. The call came on the 3rd day, at 11 in the morning. Logan was on the site. He saw Ava's name and stepped away from everything immediately, which told him more about his own state of mind than he would have admitted out loud. "We have it," she said. No preamble. Everything. Webb's communications with Voss going back 14 months, the financial transfers, a recording, legally obtained, of a conversation where Webb explicitly describes the documents he passed and what Voss paid for them. A pause, and in it something that sounded like the first full exhale she'd taken in 2 weeks. "The shareholder meeting is Friday, noon. I'm presenting everything there first before I take it anywhere else, because I want it on record in front of the people who have a right to know first." "The board doesn't know yet?" 3 board members know. The ones I trust. The rest find out Friday with everyone else. Her voice had the tight wire quality of someone who had made a large and irreversible decision and was standing on the other side of it. "I want you there." He stopped. "Ava, I know what I'm asking." She said it quickly before he could finish the objection. "I know it puts you in a room full of people who currently think the worst of you. I know it's uncomfortable, and I know you don't owe me this." A beat. "But I want you there, not because it helps the optics, because—" She stopped, tried again. "Because I've been standing in rooms alone for a long time, and I would like you to be in this one." He stood on the edge of the construction floor with the city laid out below him, and the wind coming in off the west and the sounds of his crew working behind him, and he thought about what she'd said at his front door. "You make me feel like who I am." "What time?" he said. 11:30. "I'll send you the address. Dress like you own the building." A pause. "Not literally. Just, I know what you meant." "Okay." She said it quietly. Then, "Logan." "Yeah. Thank you." He didn't tell her to stop thanking him this time. He just said, "I'll be there," and hung up and went back to work. He wore the dark jacket Sophie had found in the back of his closet and insisted on that morning with the authority of someone who had taken decisive personal responsibility for her father's wardrobe. It was from a wedding he'd attended 4 years ago. It still fit, barely, slightly tighter across the shoulders than it had been, which Sophie noted with the clinical assessment of a tailor. "You should stand up very straight," she said. "Thanks." "I mean it. It looks better when you stand straight." He drove to the address Ava had sent, a glass tower in Century City that reflected the September sky in its facade and had the specific quality of buildings that were designed to communicate that serious things happened inside. The lobby security had his name. He rode the elevator to the 32nd floor. The room he was directed to was large, a long oval table, maybe 30 chairs, 2/3 of them occupied. The air had the particular charge of a space where people knew something significant was about to happen, but weren't all sure what. Conversations were happening in clusters, cautious, sotto voce, the way conversations happen when people were monitoring for information rather than actually talking. Logan stood near the back wall and watched the room fill. He recognized Marcus Webb before anyone introduced them, partly because Ava had described him. 52, silver-haired, the kind of face that had learned to project trustworthiness the way other people learned to project authority, and partly because Webb looked up from a conversation when Logan entered the room and held his gaze for exactly 1 beat too long before looking away. The look of a man who knew who Logan was and what Logan's presence here might mean and was calculating what to do about it. Logan held the look and didn't move. 2 of Ava's lawyers were positioned near the front of the room. A woman Logan hadn't met, late 40s, the organized energy of someone who had prepared for multiple contingencies, caught his eye and nodded once. He nodded back. Ava came in at 11:58. She came in the way she did everything, directly, no performance, moving to the front of the room with the focused certainty of someone who knew exactly where she was going. She was in dark navy, her hair back, and she looked like she'd slept 4 hours and intended to win anyway. She scanned the room once, found Logan against the back wall. Something in her expression, not a smile, something quieter, registered his presence before she turned to face the table. "Thank you all for being here," she said. "I'm going to skip the usual format today. What I have to say won't take long, and then I'll take questions." The room had gone completely still. She talked for 12 minutes. Logan watched the table as she talked, watched the faces move through the stages. Confusion first, then attention, then the sharp particular stillness of people understanding something they hadn't expected. 3 board members showed no surprise at all, which confirmed they were the 3 Ava had pre-briefed. 4 others showed varying degrees of calculated neutrality, which told Logan they were people who did not react until they knew which way the room was going. 1 board member, heavy-set, 60s, the practiced ease of someone who'd been in enough of these rooms to look unbothered by most things, went very carefully still in a way that was different from the others. The stillness of someone managing the appearance of composure rather than actually feeling it. Logan filed that. And Webb sat 3 chairs down from that board member, and he was doing the same thing Logan had watched people do on construction sites when something structural failed. The precise moment when a person understood that the thing they'd built, the thing they depended on, was not going to hold. He was looking at the table. He'd stopped looking at Ava. His hands, folded on the table in front of him, had the rigid quality of things being held in place by an act of will. Ava reached the end of the evidence summary. The complete package has been provided to our General Counsel and will be submitted to the SEC today, following this meeting. Law enforcement has been notified. Marcus Webb's access to all Sterling Technologies systems was revoked at 10:45 this morning. The room didn't explode. It fractured, conversations breaking out simultaneously, the volume rising in the specific key of controlled panic, a dozen people trying to determine in real time what their position on this needed to be. Webb pushed his chair back. Marcus, Ava's voice was flat and clear, cutting through the room noise. Your counsel was notified this morning. You are not required to stay, but you are required to not speak to anyone in this room about this matter. Webb looked at her. His face had given up on composure. He was 52 years old and he had built 14 months of deception on the assumption that he was smarter than the woman across the table, and he was learning in real time in front of 30 people that he had been wrong. He walked out without saying anything. The door closed behind him with the ordinary hydraulic sound of an office door, which seemed wrong for the moment and was somehow worse because of it. The 40 minutes that followed were the most exhausting Logan had ever spent in a room, and he'd spent them without speaking a word. He watched Ava take the room apart and put it back together, fielding questions, redirecting deflections, managing the board member who'd been too still with the careful precision of someone who had already anticipated every move he could make and blocked it. She did not lose her temper. She did not perform outrage. She was exact and she was relentless, and she did not give an inch on anything that mattered. At one point, the heavy-set board member, his name was Caldwell, Logan had gathered, tried to reframe the narrative. The question of how proprietary information came to be in proximity to outside parties, the question, Ava said, has been answered by the evidence I've just presented, which is documented, witnessed, and legally obtained. She looked at him directly. If you have a different theory, Gerald, I'd be interested to hear the evidence it's based on. Caldwell had no evidence. He subsided. Logan stood against the back wall and watched the woman he'd picked up papers for on a beach in July dismantle, systematically and without visible strain, a scheme that had been designed specifically to destroy her. She did it without theatrics. She did it with precision and documented fact. She did it like someone who had been in enough rooms like this to know that the only thing that ultimately mattered was whether the facts were on your side. They were on her side. After the formal part ended, after Ava's legal team began the process of collecting signatures and distributing the official documentation, she broke away from the cluster of people around her and walked to the back wall. She stopped in front of Logan. She looked exhausted in a way she'd been too controlled to show during the meeting, the specific deflation of someone who had been running on adrenaline and focus for weeks and was now standing on the other side of it. Well, she said. Yeah, he said. She looked at him. How'd it look from back here? He thought about it honestly, like someone who knew exactly what she was doing and had been waiting for the right moment to do it. She absorbed that. I was terrified for most of it. I know. You could tell? No, he said, but I know you. She looked at him for a moment with the look that had been building for the last several weeks, the one that didn't fit any of the categories she usually operated in, the one that kept arriving when she wasn't watching for it. Then one of her lawyers appeared at her elbow with something that needed her immediate attention, and she turned away, and the room went back to being a room. By Friday evening, it was on every major news outlet. Ava Sterling, CEO and founder of Sterling Technologies, had uncovered a corporate espionage scheme conducted by former strategic development head Marcus Webb in coordination with competitor Richard Voss. The evidence was described as overwhelming. The SEC had opened a formal inquiry into Voss Capital, Voss's primary operating entity. 3 media outlets that had run the original stories implicating Logan issued corrections within 6 hours of the announcement. Not apologies, corrections. The legal and editorial distinction that mattered less than the fact that his name was being extracted from the narrative. By Saturday morning, it was gone. Not entirely. The internet didn't work that way, and Logan understood that some residue of it would sit in the corners of search results for a long time, the specific permanence of things that had been publicly said. But the active story had moved on. The photographers left his parking lot. The second glances at the school gates stopped. The parent who had looked away from him on Tuesday morning said hello to him at pickup on Monday. Just hello brief, moving on. No acknowledgement of anything. Logan said hello back and walked Sophie home, and didn't think about it much, which was a choice. He thought about it a little. He was still working on letting things go. Ava called on Saturday afternoon. "It's over," she said. Her voice had the quality of someone who'd slept properly for the first time in weeks. Flattened slightly, the sharp edge of sustained tension finally gone. "I know, I saw. How are you?" "Fine." A pause. "Actually fine this time." "Good." A beat. "Logan, I need to tell you something." "Okay." "The statement my team released, the part that clarified your involvement, I didn't let legal write that section, I wrote it myself." She said it without apology or performance. "I wanted to be specific. I wanted it to be accurate. I wanted it to say exactly what you are and what you did, not the legal minimum version of the truth." He thought about the statement he'd read that morning on his phone. Clean, specific, factual. His name, his actions on the beach, the nature of their friendship, the absence of any professional or financial relationship. It had read differently from the rest of the press release. He'd noticed that without identifying why. "It was good," he said. "I had a good subject." He smiled at the wall. "How are you?" "Tired," she said. "Genuinely, functionally tired in a way I haven't let myself feel in about 3 years because I couldn't afford to feel it." A pause. "I think I need to actually rest. I know what that sounds like coming from me." "It sounds like you're figuring something out." "I have a lot to figure out." She said it without the defensive edge it might have carried a few months ago. "The company needs restructuring. The board needs restructuring. I've been running at a pace that—" She stopped. "Webb was able to do what he did for 14 months, partly because I was moving too fast to see it. That's on me. That's also on him. Both things are true." "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "Sophie, does she know the story's done?" "I told her this morning. She said I told you so. Except she said it the nice way." "What's the nice way?" "She said, 'See, Dad?' Just that. 'See, Dad.'" A silence on the line that had warmth in it. "That kid," Ava said softly. "Yeah. Can I—" She stopped, started again. "Is it okay if I come over tonight? I'm not trying to make it something it isn't. I just want to sit at that table and have bad coffee and not think about anything complicated for a few hours." Logan looked at the kitchen table, the one that was too small for 3 and had to pass the salsa bowl around with coordination. He thought about the particular quality of those Friday dinners. The elbow competition, Sophie's narrated drawings, the way the apartment felt different with another person in it. Louder, less echo. "Come over," he said. "Sophie's been working on a new drawing. She's been waiting to show you." "What is it?" "I don't know. She won't show me until you're here. She says you'll get it faster." A pause. He could hear something shift in Ava's voice. Not quite a laugh, but the breath before one. "I'll be there at 7. She was there at 6:53. She brought the honey cakes from Koreatown again. The same white box, the same 40-year-old recipe, the same quiet acknowledgement that some things were worth repeating. Sophie opened the door before Logan got to it and looked at the box and said, "You remembered." "I remembered," Ava said. Sophie stepped back to let her in with the particular gravity of someone performing an important function, and Ava came into the apartment the way she had that first Friday. Careful with the space at first, reading it. Except that this time it took her about 30 seconds to shed the careful quality, and she was dropping her jacket on the arm of the couch and asking Logan where the plates were, as if the answer mattered to her in a personal way. He told her. She got them herself. Sophie produced the drawing at the table after dinner with the staged presentation of someone who had planned the reveal. She set it flat on the table between them and stepped back, watching. It was a beach. Malibu. recognizable by the shape of the water, the particular angle of the cliffs. In the drawing, a wave had knocked over a small structure in the background. In the foreground, two figures stood close together, not quite touching, both looking at the water. A third figure, smaller, with a lopsided ponytail rendered in 8-year-old detail, stood slightly ahead of them with her feet at the waterline, arms out. All three were facing forward, not at each other, at the same direction. Logan looked at it for a long moment. Ava picked it up carefully, with both hands, and looked at it the way she looked at all of Sophie's work, with actual time, actual attention. The wave already happened, Sophie explained, pointing at the background structure. But they're not looking at it. They're looking at what's next. Ava set the drawing down. She didn't say anything immediately. Logan watched her face and saw the thing she rarely let people see. Not the press conference version, not the boardroom version, but the version of Ava Sterling that existed before she'd learned to be careful with what she showed people. "It's the best one," Ava said finally. Sophie accepted this with the calm of someone who'd known it already. "I made it for you." Then, with the specific Sophie pivot that always arrived when she'd said the thing she meant to say. "Can we have the cake now?" Logan laughed. The real kind. The kind that came without warning and left you slightly surprised by yourself. Ava looked at him when he laughed. Her expression did the thing it had been doing more often lately. The thing she'd stopped trying to moderate. "Yeah," Logan said to Sophie. "We can have the cake now." They had the cake. The apartment held its ordinary sounds around them. The table was still too small, the salsa bowl still had to be passed. Sophie still talked about the ceramic potman's firing technique, even though it had been a month since the farmer's market, and the conversation showed no signs of reaching a conclusion. And Ava Sterling sat at Logan Pierce's kitchen table with her shoes off and a plate of 40-year-old honey cake in front of her. And she was not thinking about the board or the SEC inquiry or the press cycle or the 1,000 things that would need her attention on Monday morning. She was watching Sophie explain something with both hands, animated and certain and completely herself. She was thinking that the worst month of her professional life had ended at a too-small kitchen table in Santa Monica, and that she had not expected it to feel like this, like something had been returned to her that she hadn't known was missing, like a window she'd forgotten to open had finally been opened, and the air coming through it was just air, ordinary, unremarkable, sufficient, like enough. October arrived the way Southern California Octobers did, without the dramatic seasonal shift that other parts of the country got, just a slight softening of the light, a degree or two off the edge of the heat, the sky going a shade deeper blue in the late afternoon. You had to be paying attention to notice it. Logan had lived here long enough to pay attention. Things settled, not all at once. Nothing real settled all at once, but in the gradual way of water finding its level, the chaos of September receding into the ordinary forward motion of days. The SEC inquiry into Richard Voss moved through its procedural stages with the slow, grinding certainty of institutional machinery that, once set in motion, did not stop. Marcus Webb's legal team filed the first of what would be several motions. The media cycle turned, the way it always turned, toward the next story, and the story of Sterling Technologies became background noise and then history, and then the kind of thing people referenced only when they needed a case study. Logan's name cleared fully by the second week of October, not with any single announcement or reversal, but with the quiet withdrawal of attention that was, in its way, more complete than any formal declaration could have been. The world simply stopped caring, which was the world's way of admitting it had been wrong without having to say so. He noticed the parent at the school gate, the one who had looked away that Tuesday in September, start to make eye contact again. Just brief. Just the standard acknowledgement of two people who occupied the same space on a regular basis. Logan returned it every time without comment, without pointed courtesy, without any of the small performances of dignity that were available to him. He just said hello and meant it and moved on. He was still working on letting things go. He was getting better at it. Sophie noticed the change in her father before he fully noticed it himself, which was consistent with everything he knew about her. She mentioned it on a Wednesday morning in mid-October, walking to school, in the sideways manner she had with observations she'd been sitting on for a while. "You seem different," she said. "Different how?" "Like you're here more." She considered the words as she said them. Before, sometimes you were here, but it felt like part of you was somewhere else, thinking about something. I think about a lot of things. I know, but it's different now. She shifted her backpack. It's like you came back from somewhere. He looked at her walking beside him, the lopsided ponytail, still listing left, still undefeated. The precise way she planted her feet when she walked, the particular light in her that had been there from the beginning, from before he'd had enough perspective to understand what it was. Maybe I did, he said. She accepted this. Took his hand for the last half block to the school gate, the way she still sometimes did, without self-consciousness, because she'd decided that hand-holding was fine regardless of what kids her age thought about it. He'd never loved her more for anything than that specific refusal to be embarrassed by needing him. He walked home alone, and the morning was clear and ordinary and enough. Ava restructured. That was the word she used, restructuring. And Logan came to understand over the following weeks that it meant something larger than the board reshuffling and the executive appointments that followed Webb's departure. It meant her. She was restructuring herself, which was a harder and less documented process than anything happening in the boardrooms of Sterling Technologies. She took 2 weeks off in October. Actual off, results. Not the Tokyo kind, not working from a different city off. She told her assistant she was unavailable for non-emergency contact, and she meant it enough that it held. She spent one of those weeks at a rented house in the Central Valley, somewhere with land and no photographers, and a kitchen she cooked in herself with mediocre results that she reported to Logan via text, with the specific dark humor of someone discovering a previously unknown limitation. Made pasta. Noodles okay. Sauce unclear. What happened to the sauce? It became a paste. I don't know at what point in the process I lost it. Did you use it anyway? I'm not a quitter. He'd laughed at his phone in the middle of the Culver City site and gotten a look from Torres that he hadn't explained. She came back from the 2 weeks different in the specific way of people who'd done something uncomfortable and necessary. There was a slightly less defended quality to her. Not softer, that wasn't the right word. She was never soft in the way people sometimes meant it, but more willing to stay still, less reflexive about filling quiet with activity. She sat at his kitchen table on a Friday in late October and didn't look at her phone for 2 hours, which Logan had come to understand was an act of significant will for her and tried not to make a production of. I called my mother, she said, out of nowhere, while Sophie was in the other room. He looked up from the dishes. And? It was awkward. We haven't talked properly in about 4 years. She turned her coffee cup. She asked if I was okay. I said yes. She didn't believe me, and I knew she didn't believe me, and neither of us knew what to do with that. A pause. Then she asked about work, and it got easier because work is the language we have. Is that enough? No, Ava said. But it's a start. She looked at the table. I used to think the fact that I didn't need people was a strength. I had evidence for it. Every time I depended on someone professionally, they either burned me or fell short. Webb was just the most expensive version of that. That's not the same as not needing people, Logan said. That's needing the wrong ones. She looked at him. When did you get philosophical? I've always been philosophical. You just weren't listening. She almost threw her napkin at him. He could tell by the way her hand moved toward it. She restrained herself with the dignity of a person who had decided she was above napkin throwing and was not entirely certain she was. Sophie came back from her room with a library book and a question about the water cycle that led to a 20-minute conversation that neither Logan nor Ava had budgeted for, and that ended with Sophie satisfied, the library book abandoned in favor of a piece of paper on which she was now drawing a diagram of cloud formation that was architecturally ambitious. Logan watched Ava watch Sophie draw. There was something in Ava's face during those moments, a particular quality of attention, patient and unhurried, that was different from how she looked at anything else. Like she was memorizing it. Like she understood it was rare and wanted to be present for it correctly. He turned back to the dishes. He thought about what Sophie had said on the walk to school. It's like you came back from somewhere. He understood it better now than he had that morning. November was when things shifted again. quietly, without announcement. It was a Sunday. Logan had taken Sophie to the park, the one 3 blocks from the apartment with the old climbing structure that Sophie maintained was beneath her, but used anyway on the grounds that not everything had to match your age. He was sitting on a bench actually reading, the book he'd been trying to finish since July, which he was now 30 pages from the end of, when Ava showed up. Not planned. She texted 15 minutes before. "Are you at the park?" He'd said yes. She'd shown up. She sat down on the bench next to him. Didn't say anything for a moment. Watched Sophie navigate the climbing structure with the focused engineering precision she brought to all physical challenges. "I was going to drive around," Ava said. "I was heading somewhere and then I wasn't, and then I was just driving. And I realized I was driving toward here." She looked at the park, at Sophie, at the ordinary Sunday afternoon of it. "I think I've stopped pretending I don't know what that means." Logan put the book down. "What does it mean?" She turned to look at him. She had the particular expression she wore when she was about to say something she'd thought about a lot and was still slightly afraid of. The expression that had been appearing more frequently since the shareholder meeting, since the honey cake, since Sophie's drawing of 3 figures facing the same direction at the edge of the water. "It means you're where I want to be," she said. "Both of you. This," she gestured at the park, at Sophie, at the bench, at all of it. "This is the thing I drive toward when I stop pretending I'm going somewhere else." A pause. "I know what I am. I know my work isn't going to disappear. I know I'm not going to become someone who doesn't run a company and think about acquisition strategy at 7 in the morning. I'm not promising to become someone I'm not. I'm not asking you to." "I know." She looked at him steadily. "I'm asking if there's room for what I actually am in this." He looked at her. He thought about what it had taken him to get here. The 3 years after Claire, the slow and imperfect process of rebuilding a life around a shape that no longer existed. The way Sophie had pulled him forward by simply being herself and needing him to show up. He thought about Hector telling him he looked like the drywall. He thought about the beach, the crowd with their phones, the specific math that had made putting his phone away the only option he could live with. He thought about the fact that nothing here was guaranteed. That Ava came with the full complexity of who she was, the company, the profile, the difficulty of being someone that public in a world that rarely let public people be private ones. That there would be more hard stretches, more things going wrong in ways no one had planned for, more moments of sitting across from each other at a too small table and working out the distance between 2 people's lives. He thought about all of that honestly. And then he thought about the imperfect ceramic bowl on Sophie's nightstand, the 40-year-old honey cake recipe, the drawing of 3 figures facing the water. "There's room," he said. Ava looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her expression. The last piece of the wall she'd been maintaining, the final managed distance, setting itself down. "Okay," she said, quietly. "Okay." Across the park, Sophie dismounted the climbing structure, spotted them on the bench, and came running over with the focused energy of someone who had important information to deliver. She stopped in front of them, slightly out of breath. "I figured out the problem with the top structure," she said, pointing back at the climbing frame. "The angle's wrong. If they moved that bar 6 inches left, it would be way more stable." "Tell the city," Logan said. "I'm going to write a letter." She looked at both of them on the bench, her expression moving through the quick calculation it always did. Then she sat down on the other side of Ava, without asking, without ceremony, and picked up the library book Logan had set down and examined the cover. "Is this any good?" she asked. "Getting there," Logan said. Sophie opened to the first page, apparently deciding to form her own opinion, and read in the particular absorbed silence that meant she was done talking for a while. The 3 of them sat on the bench in the November afternoon light. Logan didn't say anything. Ava didn't say anything. Sophie read her book. It was not a perfect moment. The bench was slightly damp from the morning, and Logan's jacket wasn't warm enough, and somewhere nearby a dog was barking at something it would not stop barking at. But it was real, and it was theirs. And the November light kept doing what November light did, going golden and low in the way of things that knew they were temporary and were beautiful for it. The months that followed were not a montage. Real life didn't montage. It moved in the particular uneven rhythm of actual time. Some weeks fast, some weeks grinding, some weeks so ordinary they left no specific impression at all. Logan finished the Culver City project in December and moved to a new one in Burbank. Ava reorganized her executive team and spent the first quarter of the new year in the complicated, unglamorous work of institutional repair, which was less dramatic than crisis and harder than anything that came before it because it required sustained attention to detail with no adrenaline to run on. They were bad at some things. Ava forgot plans. Not frequently, but enough. She would commit to something and then the company would produce an emergency and the commitment would fall into the gap. And she would call Logan to apologize, and he would accept the apology and mean it, and then 2 weeks later it would happen again. They talked about it directly, the way they talked about most things. And it got better, and then it was bad again, and then it got better again. That was the actual texture of it. Not resolved, just continually worked on, like everything worth working on. Logan was not easy either. He was aware of this. He had the emotional shorthand of someone who had built a self-sufficient life. The reflexive self-reliance, the slight resistance to being needed in ways he hadn't anticipated. The moments when he would go quiet for no explicable reason and need 45 minutes of solitude to find himself again. Ava learned to read the quiet. She didn't always get it right. Sometimes she pushed when he needed space, and sometimes she gave space when he needed her to push. They got better at it slowly. Sophie was the steady center of all of it. Not because she was perfect. She wasn't. She had the stubbornness of someone who came by their opinions honestly and the volatility of a 9-year-old navigating a world that kept expanding. But because she remained entirely herself, regardless of what the adults around her were doing, she was the fixed point they both oriented around, without planning to, without having discussed it. In February, she asked Ava directly if she was going to live with them. They were in the kitchen, Sunday morning. Ava had started spending Sunday mornings here with the gradual inevitability of something that had been true before it was official. She was making eggs, competently now, the culinary disasters of the Central Valley having produced at least one reliable skill. And Sophie was at the table doing something with colored pencils that appeared to be a map of a fictional country with detailed geographic features. "Not yet," Ava said without turning from the stove. "But I think maybe one day." Sophie considered this. "One day when?" "I don't know exactly." "Do you want to?" Ava turned from the stove. She looked at Sophie with the full attention she gave her, the unhurried kind. "Yeah," she said, "I want to." Sophie looked at her map, made a mark on it. "Okay," she said, "I'm adding a room." Ava turned back to the eggs. Logan, standing in the kitchen doorway with his coffee, watched her shoulders do the thing they did when she was managing an emotion she hadn't planned for. A slight rise, and then a deliberate release, like something being set down carefully. He didn't say anything. He went to the table and sat down and looked at Sophie's map, which had a bay on the western coast, and a mountain range in the north, and an unlabeled room in what appeared to be the capital city. "What's this country called?" he asked. "I haven't decided yet," Sophie said. "Names are important. You can't rush them." "Fair enough." She kept drawing. The kitchen smelled like eggs and coffee and Sunday. Outside the window, the February morning was doing what February mornings in California did, clear and mild and entirely without drama, just time moving forward at its ordinary pace. Logan proposed on a Tuesday. Not because Tuesday was significant, not because he'd planned it for Tuesday specifically. He'd been carrying the ring for 3 weeks. A simple thing, not excessive, chosen with the kind of deliberate understatement that fit them both. And the opportunity had not presented itself in any of the planned ways he'd imagined, because real moments almost never arrived in the form you'd rehearsed them. They were on the beach. Not Malibu specifically, a stretch of the PCH coast that Sophie had declared her personal research site and had been returning to since August to monitor what she described as a long-term water pattern study. It was a Tuesday in March, a school holiday Logan had forgotten to note until Sophie reminded him, and the three of them had ended up at the water the way they ended up most places now. Not with elaborate planning, just moving in the same direction because that was what they did. Sophie was at the waterline doing her research, which on this occasion involved a measuring tape and a notebook and a level of scientific rigor that was either impressive or deeply unnecessary, and possibly both. The afternoon was cool and clear. The ocean was doing what oceans did, indifferent and enormous, and going on forever past the edge of what you could see. Ava was standing beside him, not quite touching, watching Sophie work. "She's going to be an engineer," Ava said. "She says architect." "She'll probably be both." Logan looked at the water. He thought about the first time he'd stood on this stretch of coast with Ava, the crowd and the cameras and the scattered papers, the moment when everyone else had reached for their phones and he'd just moved toward her instead. He thought about how that had seemed like nothing at the time. Just a small correction, just a person needing help and another person being close enough to give it. He thought about what Sophie had said walking to school. "It's like you came back from somewhere." He thought about Claire. He did that with more peace now than he had in a long time. Not without sadness. The sadness was always there, tucked into the permanent structure of him, but the sadness no longer carried the weight of incompletion it used to. Claire had been his. That was true. What came after her was also his, and that was equally true. And the two truths did not compete. He reached into his jacket pocket. "Ava." She turned from the water, looked at him, saw his expression, and went still. He wasn't down on one knee. He'd thought about it and decided that wasn't right for them. Too performed, too much like something out of someone else's story. He was just standing there beside her on the sand with the wind off the water, and Sophie 20 yards away measuring something with focused scientific application. He held out the ring. She looked at it, looked at him. "I'm not good at speeches," he said. "You know that. I know that. And I'm not going to pretend this is uncomplicated. It's not. You're who you are, and I'm who I am, and we live in different registers of the world, and there's going to be a lot of figuring things out." He paused. "But I'm better at figuring things out than I used to be, and I'd rather figure them out with you." She was still looking at him. Her jaw was doing the tight-set thing, but different from how it usually did it. Not manage tension, something else. Something more like trying to hold a specific expression when another one was trying to replace it. "Logan, Sophie thinks you should live with us," he said. "She added a room to a fictional country." Ava made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something else. "I heard about the room. She doesn't just add rooms for anyone." "I know." Her voice had gone quiet. The wind took part of it. "So," he looked at her, "spend the rest of your life with us." She looked at the ring, looked at him, looked at Sophie, who had apparently concluded her measurements and was now looking back at them from the waterline with her notebook in her hand and the specific expression of someone who was pretending she hadn't been watching. Ava took the ring. She put it on herself, which was entirely consistent with who she was, and Logan loved her for it the way he loved all the specific truths of her. "Yes," she said. "Obviously, yes." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He put his arm around her and she leaned into it. Not gracefully, the angle was slightly wrong and she ended up more against his shoulder than anything, but they found the position and settled into it the way they settled into most things, by making small adjustments until it worked. Sophie walked up from the waterline and looked at Ava's hand and then at her father and said, "Finally," with the satisfaction of someone whose patience had been exhausted but whose faith had been vindicated. "You knew?" Logan said. "I guessed," Sophie said. "I've been guessing since November." She looked at Ava. "Does this mean you're coming to the school play? It's in April. I have a non-speaking part, but I've added some movements that I think elevate it significantly." "I'll be there," Ava said. "Good." Sophie looked at the ocean, made a note in her notebook. "The water's doing something different today. The interval between the waves is shorter than last month." She wrote something. "I think it means something." "What does it mean?" Ava asked. Sophie considered. "I don't know yet, but I'm keeping track." She went back to the water. Logan and Ava stood together on the sand and watched her, and the afternoon held them there in the cool March light, and the ocean went on doing what it had always done, pulling back, coming forward, pulling back, coming forward, indifferent to the small human decisions made on its margin, but present for all of them, regardless. They were married in June. Small. That had been the one condition Logan held without negotiating. Small. Ava's instinct had been to defer to what was expected of someone at her level of public life, the kind of wedding that doubled as a statement. Logan had said, simply and without apology, that he wasn't interested in a statement. They'd gone back and forth on it once. Only once. Ava had sat with his position for a day and come back and said, "You're right. I don't want a statement either. I want a wedding." 30 people. The beach in Malibu, just north of the stretch where Ava's cabana had been destroyed by a wave 11 months earlier, which was either poetic or slightly absurd, and was probably both. A ceremony that took 22 minutes and said what it needed to say. Sophie stood between them in a dress she had selected herself with the same critical authority she applied to everything, holding flowers she'd chosen on the grounds that they looked like something that had a story. Derek stood beside Logan and cried quietly and denied it afterward with complete commitment. Maggie had organized the catering with the focused competence she brought to all things and had been doing so for 6 months, which meant the food was excellent and everything happened at the right time. Ava's mother flew in from Portland, and the two of them had a conversation before the ceremony that Logan wasn't present for, and that Ava described afterward only as complicated and necessary, and a start. There were no photographers beyond the one they'd hired, a woman who worked quietly at the edges of things and caught what was real rather than what was posed. The photographs that came back 2 weeks later showed all the things that wedding photographs usually missed. Maggie eating a shrimp and gesturing with it while making a point, Derek's face during the vows, Logan's hand around Ava's hand at the moment she said yes, Sophie looking at the ocean with her notebook, still taking measurements on her wedding day because some habits were not suspended for ceremony. Logan didn't cry during the vows. He thought he might and then stood there and felt something too solid for crying, a kind of stillness, a rightness, the specific feeling of things arriving at their correct position after a long time in transit. He thought about Claire, briefly, at the edge of the moment, with the love that doesn't go away and doesn't need to. He thought she would have liked Ava, not because they were similar, they weren't, but because Claire had always respected people who knew exactly what they were, and Ava was nothing if not entirely what she was. He thought Sophie would be okay. Had always known it, but he knew it differently now, not as the outcome of sustained effort and careful management, but as a fact of who she was. She was going to be okay the way certain things were okay, through their own nature, through something internal and reliable that no amount of circumstance had managed to diminish. And then Ava was saying something, and he was saying something back, and the ocean was doing what it always did behind them, and the afternoon was warm and clear and ordinary in the best possible way. That evening, after most of the guests had gone, the three of them walked down to the waterline. Sophie had her shoes off, feet in the wet sand, notebook under her arm. Ava had her heels off too. They were in Logan's hand, straps hooked over his fingers, because practicality didn't suspend itself for ceremony either. The sun was going down over the water in the way Pacific sunsets went down, with more color than seemed reasonable, the sky doing multiple things at once in the west. "This is where it started," Sophie said. "Pretty much," Logan said. "The wave came from over there." She pointed. "And you were sitting over there." She pointed in the other direction. "And everyone else just watched." "Everyone else just watched," Logan agreed. Sophie looked at the water. "Why do you think you didn't?" He thought about it, the honest version. "I don't know, it didn't seem like a choice. Someone needed help, and I was the closest person who wasn't already busy being a spectator." Sophie considered this. "I think it was a choice," she said. "I think you just made it fast." He looked at her. 8 years old on the beach in July, telling him the waves were sneaky. 9 years old measuring water intervals and adding rooms to fictional countries. Almost 10 now, standing at the water's edge on his wedding day with a notebook under her arm, figuring out how the world worked. "Maybe," he said. Ava was standing beside him, looking at the water. She'd been quiet since they'd come down to the shore. The quiet she had now that he understood, the one that meant she was thinking about something she'd eventually say when she'd found the right words for it. "You know what I thought about today?" she said. "Tell me." "The papers." She looked at the water. "The ones the wave took out past the breakers. I counted them on this beach, 3 pages, and I was convinced the whole time that those were the ones that mattered, that they had the specific information that made them irreplaceable." She paused. I never found out what was on them. Webb took the information a different way. The 3 lost pages were just pages. Nothing critical. So you worried about them for nothing. I worried about them because I was used to treating every loss like a disaster. She was quiet for a moment. I think I spent a lot of years doing that, treating everything that slipped away like a catastrophe, not giving myself time to find out if it actually mattered. She turned to look at him. You were the first thing I didn't lose when I stopped holding on so tight. He looked at her in the fading light. The wind off the water moved a piece of her hair across her face, and she pushed it back with the back of her hand, the same gesture she'd made on the beach in July, soaked and undone and reaching for scattered documents in the sand. You stopped holding on tight, he said, or you started holding something worth holding. She thought about it. Both, she said. I think both. Sophie had walked a few steps forward, right to the edge where the water met the sand, the last of the surf running over her feet. She was looking out at the darkening water with the focused attention she gave to things she was trying to understand. The waves come from really far away, she said, to no one in particular. Like, they start thousands of miles out, and then they travel all that way and end up right here. She looked down at her feet. They change everything they touch, and they don't even know it. Logan and Ava were quiet. Sophie turned back to look at them, standing there on the sand with the sunset going down behind them, and she had the expression she had when she'd understood something she'd been working on for a long time. I think that's us, she said simply. She turned back to the water. Logan felt Ava's hand find his. Not reached for, just arrived. The natural end of a gesture. He held it. The sunset kept doing what sunsets did, excessive and unrepeatable, spilling color across the sky and the water with no regard for who was watching or whether they deserved it. He thought about something he'd understood over the past year, slowly, the way you understood most true things, not all at once, but in accumulation, in the buildup of small moments until suddenly the thing had enough weight to be real. He thought about it clearly now, in the way of things that had finally settled into their right form. People talked about strength like it was something you built by becoming harder, by needing less, by making yourself self-contained enough that nothing and no one could reach the parts of you that could be hurt. He'd tried that version. He'd been good at it for a while. He'd looked like the drywall and called it coping and taken his daughter to the beach on his day off because his boss told him to. What he knew now, what the year had taught him, imperfectly and through some amount of collateral damage, was that the actual thing, the thing that held, wasn't hardness. It was the willingness to walk toward the mess, to put the phone away when everyone else raised theirs, to stay in the room after the crisis, because the room was where people actually needed you, to let someone in past the self-sufficient outer structure, because the outer structure was not the same as the actual self, and the actual self needed what everyone's actual self needed, which was to be known by someone who had chosen to know you. It was not a clean lesson. It was not a lesson he'd finished learning. He would probably be learning it for the rest of his life, imperfectly, with setbacks, with the occasional period of going backward before going forward again. But here was the thing about that. Here was what the ocean kept doing, year after year, whether anyone was watching or not. It kept coming forward. It kept reaching the shore. It pulled back and came forward again with the unreasonable, tireless persistence of something that simply did not accept the possibility of stopping. You could learn from that, if you were paying attention. Ava squeezed his hand once. He squeezed back. Sophie turned from the water, shoes in one hand, notebook under her other arm, and said, "Can we eat? I'm starving. I've been measuring things all day." "There's food back at the tables," Ava said. "Is there still cake?" "There's still cake," Logan said. "Good." She started walking back up the beach, matter of fact, done with the ocean for the evening. "Because the waves will still be here tomorrow, and I need cake today." Logan and Ava followed her up the sand. The sun finished going down behind them. The ocean went on in the dark, pulling back and coming forward, the way it had before any of them were here and the way it would after. Indifferent and enormous and, in its way, exactly right. The wedding lights were still on up the beach. Derek was arguing with someone about something with his arms, which meant he was having a good time. Maggie was wrapping the remaining food with the efficiency of a woman who understood that logistics did not end at sunset. 30 people who had watched two imperfect people make a real decision were finishing their drinks and their conversations and their small separate acts of bearing witness. And Sophie was already at the dessert table, filling her plate with the focused certainty of someone who had been promised cake and intended to collect on that promise fully. Logan watched her and felt the thing he'd felt since she was born. That specific and unreasonable love that had no bottom to it, that had survived everything and would survive everything, that was probably the most reliable fact of his entire life. He felt Ava's shoulder against his. He thought, this is enough. This is more than enough. This is the whole thing. He didn't say it out loud, he didn't have to. Some things you just carry forward with you, quiet and certain, into whatever comes next.